I was curious when you started talking about entrepreneurship. So are you building your company? Are you building it to sell it someday? I heard that you are not part of the Alt MBA. You're not teaching per se. Other people who are talented or as talented or more talented or whatever are teaching it. Are you preparing or treating, at least, is that the mindset to eventually at least have the option to sell it?
Absolutely not. You got to decide if you're a freelancer or an entrepreneur at any given moment.
Yeah.
So Mondays between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock, I'm an entrepreneur. I made that part up. And the rest of the time, I'm a freelancer. I'm on stage. No one wrote my content. If you read a blog post that I wrote or listen to a podcast I did, it's me. There's nobody behind the scenes. I have 0 staff when I do my freelance work. 0. I make every slide. That's my craft. When I thought about the Alt MBA, I said, what would happen if I acted like an entrepreneur in the sense of I'm not allowed to say I'll do that part of the work. I just have to find extraordinarily talented people, give them the freedom, gain enrollment, and help them get to where they're going. Yeah. So the discipline of the Alt MBA for me is not that I'm trying to build an entity that I could sell. It's that I'm trying to build an entity that scales in a really juicy personal way that I as a human could never scale. And that every time something shows up for the Alt MBA that I could do and I alone could do, we take it out because that's not allowed.
Well, so it sounds like maybe you're saying it's a personal decision, but like, I guess what I was getting to, the next follow-up question was, should we be running our businesses, thinking about processes? There's a guy on MSNBC, Marcus Lemonis, who's famous.
He has a billboard on my commute to New York City, and I've never seen him speak, but I've just seen his billboard.
Yeah, I love his show. It's fun. But he talks about people and process and product. Is that what we should be doing? Should we be building our businesses as if, and I've heard Tony Robbins say it too, if you're not building a business that you can't eventually sell, you're doing it wrong.
Well, wrong is such a loaded term, right? So the EMyth Revisited is the classic of this work on the business, not in the business. That there is a model of entrepreneurship that says every job should be done by the least skilled available person so you can pay them the least amount. That if you can just build a business with all of those building blocks where you're never overpaying for a different task, at some point you will extract maximum value. But my overarching belief is culture doesn't exist to make capitalism better. Capitalism exists to make our culture better. Use it when you need it, but we're not here for capitalism. So maximizing your profit isn't the goal. Maximizing your life and your impact is the goal.
Right.
So what's missing from Tony's sentence, which he probably meant to say, is you're doing it wrong if your goal is to maximize your profit. I agree with that. I just don't understand why maximizing your profit is the goal. Okay.
You guys liking this so far? I forgot you were here.
You guys are great. Thank you. You asked me about working for free. Do you want me to riff on that for 2 minutes?
Please. Should I be working for free?
So freelancers face a dilemma all the time, which is that some people, some organizations tell themselves the story that they should acquire certain kinds of work for free. They deserve it for free, or they're offering an opportunity for free. And that the only way to work with that sort of person is to do it for free.
Yeah. RFP is a popular acronym, right? You send in this proposal, request for proposal.
Well, that's it. Okay. Let me address that too. I'm talking about the zoo needs an ad campaign. And so the zoo says, get famous, Mr. Creative, Mrs. Creative, do our ad campaign for free. That's one kind of thing. The other thing you're saying is there's a purchasing agent who's figured out that by having a carrot of money, they can get you to do a whole bunch of preliminary work first, bidding against all the other freelancers. Right. That one's way more interesting to me, so I'll answer that one first. Okay. If you're answering RFPs and you do not have a significant technical competitive advantage or an asset that others don't have, you're in a race to the bottom. And therefore, if you want to be a productive freelancer, you must do work that isn't spec'd in an RFP. You just say, I don't answer RFPs. I wait till someone wants what I do. I am a category of one. If you need my kind of work. Jill Greenberg, the wonderful photographer, doesn't answer RFPs. If you want Jill Greenberg, there's only one Jill Greenberg. That meant she had to develop a photographic style that was hers. And the only person you can get it from is her. So it's harder, but it's also better. In terms of the other one about the zoo, the question is really simple, which is, will doing this work for free either give me karma, so even if no one knows I did it for free, I'm glad I did, because free world, just do it.
Sure.
Or, from a capitalist point of view, does it give me a credential and a piece of my portfolio that becomes part of my story that I can tell to somebody else who will pay me for it? But the chances that the person who hired you for free is now going to pay you money are very, very low.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was getting at too, is how should we be measuring that success, right? And it's not just all about the money, right? Sometimes there are other valuable things, whether it's reputation management or
the first 150
experience.
speeches I gave, I paid to give them. I had a PR firm that would reach out to organizations. When I was running Yo-Yo Dine, it was our only marketing, was me being on stage. And it was like, do you need an internet speaker? And it was 1994. Everyone needed an internet speaker. Didn't get paid to give these speeches. But if I hadn't given those 150 speeches, I wouldn't be me.
Yeah. And I think you wrote recently about the comparison of, if you're a guest on Krista Tippett's show, for example.
Or Oprah, yeah.
Yeah, should you be paid for that?
Right.
And I guess the answer is it depends what you value, or you see the value in it.
Well, but back to my point about the zoo. If you show up on Oprah, if you're an author, or if you show up on Krista's thing and you're a spiritual leader, there's an idea piracy occurred. Your idea went into the world for free.
Yeah.
But your obscurity problem was just solved.
Yeah.
And most of us have an obscurity problem, not a piracy problem, right? So once everyone knows your idea, you do better, not worse.
I agree. And this is a conversation or a wrestle that I have with clients and partners and collaborators all the time.
Sure.
Including this hotel, for example. Like, hey, you have an empty hotel ballroom. I can actually fill that ballroom for you. And yet they see me as an ATM. They want to come and take money out.
Well, it's what they do for a living.
Sure. But at the same time, I'm saying, I bring something to the table. My people have people. They have conferences of their own. They have business meetings and offsite meetings. And hey, don't you think that if I bring a few hundred people here, this will get on their map? And so sometimes I think people are very short-sighted, just looking for that quick return on the investment.
So in B2B selling, it's really important to understand that the person you're selling to isn't spending their own money. And the person you're paying isn't getting to keep the money you're giving them. So the only question that happens in B2B is, what will I tell my boss? And if you can't answer that question in a way that makes them happy, you can't do business with them. So what's probably happening in an institution with hundreds or thousands of people is someone you will never meet made a rule. And the person you're dealing with isn't being unreasonable. They're doing what they believe to be their job. Yeah. So the challenge of engaging as a generous hustle is to find someone who is in a flexible enough institution that they can receive your gift.
Yeah, so maybe what you're saying is you might be talking to the wrong person.
Yeah, almost certainly.
Yeah, good, I like it. We've all been stuck before.
Yeah, all the time.
Talk to us about how to get unstuck. Sometimes we're stuck in a bad relationship, or we're stuck in a job that we hate, or I can think of 1,000 different ways that we're stuck. But talk about getting unstuck.
Well, I guess I could share two bits of advice. One is, we get stuck when we are more afraid of change than we are of staying still. So we say, this is better than that alternative. There are two fears battling with each other. Well,
the problem with that is the being uncomfortable, or the bad part has to get so bad sometimes.
Exactly. So what you end up with, if you accept it, is a life of always, whatever the next thing you're stuck on, always being unhappy. Because you're just stuck until finally the unhappiness tilts over. It's sort of like, why do they wait till the union is on strike before they settle the contract? Why do they wait until the government is shut down? Why don't they just have the negotiation 3 days earlier and skip the pain?
Yeah.
Well, it's because the same story is going on in our head. So the discipline here is to realize this isn't a one-time thing. This is a lifetime thing. How do I experience the pain in advance so I don't have to live through it? How do I do scenario planning sufficient to cause me to make mature, interesting decisions before I have to actually live through all the pain? That's part A, difficult part of human nature.
Yeah.
But most of the time we're stuck as professionals and as creatives. We're stuck because we've raised the stakes too much on the thing we're, I want to write this book. This book will change my life. I can't write chapter 1. I'm completely stuck. And we want chapter 1 to be perfect. Well, the way around it is to find other tasks to do that don't have so much import. So instead of writing chapter 1, write 20 blog posts. But when you're done with 20 blog posts, you could then reveal to yourself that that's chapter 1.
Yeah. So it's small incremental steps.
Exactly.
It's not looking at the 1,000-mile journey one step at a time. Okay, that's good advice.
Here, the short version of this is, if you're self-employed, you almost certainly have the world's worst boss.
I'm going to let that sink in for just a minute. Yeah, because we are our own worst critic. We're hard on ourselves.
And we don't set up systems to enable ourselves to succeed because we're paralyzed, because we're afraid.
Well, that's a good transition into shame.
Oh, yeah.
So let's talk about what Brené Brown has written a lot about,
Yep.
guilt versus shame. And let's talk about this sabotage that we do when we are our own worst critic, and how, if we fall onto the wrong side of the fence, guilt, Brené writes, is about feeling bad about what I've done. And she says shame is about saying, I am bad, right?
Right. She and I are using different terminology.
Okay.
She's certainly been in this far deeper than I have, but I've been talking about it a long time too.
But what I want to uncover here is the sabotage that we do on ourselves, right?
But let's agree that shame is one of the basic human emotions. It's one of the earliest emotions we experience. It has been around forever. It goes straight to a key part of our brain. And it's super effective. Our culture, all cultures, have a significant element of shame to force other people to comply with the culture, so the culture becomes the culture. People like us do things like this. And I believe we're naive to say there will be no shame. There's the shame of the 3-year-old who wets his pants just on his way to nursery school, right? That there's shame in lots of places. For me, there's a huge distinction between shaming behavior and shaming people. And society can only exist when we say to people, how dare you? When we say to people, that behavior is shameful. People like us don't do things like this.
What gives you the right?
Right? But we say those things to people to get them to keep them from destroying our society if they're, have selfish goals. But shaming people, you will never amount to anything, you are a loser, you are a bad person, that crosses every line, because what it does is it's the dream killer. It's the thing that prevents a human from seeing possibility and working their way out of it. So if you think about Kat and her work on prison reform, too often we say to people, you're a bad person and we're locking you up and we'd like to lock you up forever because you don't deserve anything. As opposed to saying that behavior is not allowed in our world, we need to correct for that behavior, and once we've made our point, you should be welcomed back with our encouragement so you don't behave that way anymore. And I think the same narrative is in our head, that when we commit a faux pas, when we engage with something in the world that doesn't work because it was shameful behavior, I sure hope we learn from that, because otherwise we're sociopaths. But we shouldn't take away from that, therefore I am a bad person. Therefore I will never amount to anything. And that story we tell ourselves, that narrative is so corrosive. And the problem, and the thing that ashames me the most about being a marketer, using the word shame, is that marketers use this to make a profit. And politicians use it to win a point. And that's unacceptable to me.
Yeah, I think we've all felt this imposter syndrome, right? Like, I don't deserve to be up here. What am I doing here? You know, and when I think about the self-limiting beliefs or the self-sabotage because we are our own worst critics, I feel like, personally, that's what gets me stuck a lot of the time. So how do we overcome that? Maybe there's just one more, I want to go one more step with this.
I don't know if you're going to like my tactical step, but here you go. You don't have to do this for a living. You decided to do it for a living. If you're going to enroll in that journey, it's worth accepting that you are playing a role. No one thinks you are really like this in real life. I hope not. No one thinks I am really like this, quote, in real life. Authenticity is this made-up idea. There's no such thing as authenticity. There might be consistency. Consistency, meaning, do you act that way when no one's looking? That's really important to trust. But authenticity, that this is who you were born to be, that's ridiculous. You're playing a role. You wore certain clothes today, you shaved or didn't shave, you did things because you wanted people to see a thing and get a result. So the good news is we're not coal miners. The good news is we don't have to do some horrible task involving life and limb. We get to do this. The cost is we're playing a role and we're putting on a performance. And I get that you or I feel like an imposter. Boy, I feel terrible for you. But dance with it because it's your job. And that's what it is to be a professional, not an amateur. The amateur says, I can only do it if I feel like it. The professional says, this is my work, and I'm going to do it despite the fact that I don't feel like it.
Pushing through. Doing the hard work.
There's no pushing because there's no other side. It's chopping wood, carrying water, doing the work. That's your job.
So can we end this talk?
Do we have to?
I'm afraid so.
We're going to run out of film.
Probably. So can we end this by me telling you a little story
Please.
and sharing with you the best advice I've ever gotten?
Okay.
And it happened to come from you.
Oh, all right.
And fair warning, I'm reluctant to share this a little bit because it's personal. But I think it has enough value that it's worth sharing. Fun fact about me, I'm adopted. And my entire life, I had a great childhood, but I always had this desire to find my birth parents. And I wanted to know who I was, my roots, where did I come from? And did you see that movie with Nicole Kidman and the guy from Slumdog Millionaire? It was called Lion.
It was on the seat next to me on a plane, so
Yeah.
I know it without the words.
It's a really good movie. If you've seen that movie, maybe you can understand a little bit how I felt. I felt a lot like him in that there was just, I can't describe it to someone who's not in the situation, but I had this burning desire to find out my roots.
So hard.
Yeah. And as a teenager, I petitioned the courts for my birth records, and I got denied over and over and over again. And that only just fueled my fire. I felt it was unfair. I felt kind of violated. Like, how dare you withhold from me what's my right to have? Yeah. And it was very difficult. Flash forward a number of years, when the internet became more pervasive and public documents became more available, I found my birth mother, and it was the most amazing thing. Oh. And I sent her this letter, and I wrote, and included a picture, by the way, of our family. So we have 4 amazing kids, very happily married. I've got a great family, and I sent this great family photo with wearing our best. And I wrote a note that said something like, this may come to a shock, but I found you, and I just wanted to say thank you. I want to say thank you for doing probably the most selfless thing anyone could ever do.
Wow.
Which is, a shot at a better life for me.
That's so generous, yeah.
And so I sent that letter, and it also said, if you want contact, I would be more than happy to have a phone call or come meet you. I'm thrilled that I found you after this, 25-year, 30-year search. And I got a letter back. And just to give you a little context, when you're adopted, your mind goes to the edges of the extreme.
Of course.
Right? You think, is my dad Steve Jobs? Like, is there some inheritance waiting for me someplace that I should know about? Or is my mom or dad some famous, rock musician or athlete? And so it goes that way. And it also goes to the other side of the spectrum, which is, am I the product of a violent crime?
Right. And
then everything in between. And so I would say the not knowing is the most difficult part. Anyway, so I did get a letter back, and it was from this a very proper, looked like a proper organization. It was some sort of firm, and I thought, Steve Jobs probably is my dad. Like, it was like a Dumbledore is bequeathing, the resurrection stone.
But this whole thing sounds so wrenching.
So I opened it, and it said, dear Mr. Elliott, we're in receipt of your letter, and our client does admit that she is your biological mother, but wants no contact. And this is our official putting you on notice that if you have any further correspondence, we will not hesitate to file a
Oh, I'm so sorry.
restraining order against you. And it was a sucker punch.
Yeah.
I was devastated. I was crushed. I mean, I was pissed too. But I was crushed. And it was very difficult. And I probably kind of felt sorry for myself for a little bit. And this was right around the time that I quit a perfectly good job and I left the studios. I was at Universal Pictures for a while, and I decided to start this production company. And it was a time right around 2008, 2009, where you wrote Tribes. It was the first time that I reached out to you. It was a very difficult time. The recession. We were in the heart of the recession. We were knee deep. I was struggling to keep my family afloat. You were very nice. I reached out to you, but you rejected me too a couple times. Like, I don't know who you are. I'm not interested in coming.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm getting to the point of this lesson.
I'm here today.
Well, so I persisted. I was tenacious. I didn't give up, and I kept chipping away, and tried to communicate. And you were very receptive and very nice and gracious. And finally, about a year and a half later, you agreed to come to one of these meetings for the first time. This was like 2009, heading into 2010, and so you came and you sat down with me and you talked, and you were a human being, and you took the time. And do you remember what you told me? You remember that advice that you gave me?
It's out of context.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry.
I don't expect you to remember. That's okay. But I told you about how I was struggling and how I had this great idea to start this new web series, this show called Behind the Brand, where I was making it very selfishly because I actually desperately needed to know how to be successful, like right away, because I was struggling to keep my business afloat and everything that was happening. And you said to me, I'll never forget it. You said, Bryan, there's no Prince Charming in this story. There's no rescue boats. No one's coming. Stop waiting to get picked. The Today Show's not calling. CNN is not going to call you. You're not going to get scooped up, waiting to get picked, waiting to get rescued. And that just pierced my heart like no other. And I, in that moment, my whole point of view changed. I realized that I was playing the victim. I felt like one. I mean, rightfully so in some regards. But what you told me, that no one's coming, no one's going to rescue me, I need to save myself, changed that point of view into being like a survivor, right? To continue to push forward, to not give up. It changed my life.
Wow.
I want to thank you for that.
Well, don't thank me. This is you.
So there is a bit of a happy ending.
There's more than a bit of a happy ending. You have a happy family. You're doing incredibly generous, productive work that's seen by millions of people around the world.
Well, there's that, but so I also persisted, and I didn't assume that because I failed once, I would fail again. I decided maybe there's another outcome. I kept looking for my dad, and I found him. And last year, me and my whole family got to meet my dad, who was much more receptive, and figured that one day I would call. And I found out that I have 2 younger sisters, and we all got to meet in this big happy family reunion. Turns out we're Jewish on my dad's side.
Mazel tov.
Yeah. So I guess that's maybe a good place to end.
Bada boom.
Thank you.